Prologue. Piper sobbed softly out in the middle of the woods. It was all too much to handle nowadays. It was time to leave her home pack here in Montana. She could no longer take the pain of his betrayal anymore. Not that her Alpha Bradley of the Black Haven pack, knew that it hurt her every time that he was with another. He had no idea who she was to him. She, however, had scented him out 3 years ago, at the age of 18. On the first full moon after her 18th birthday. Had felt pain almost instantly, and not because he'd been with another at the time, but because he'd not scented her, not recognized her as his mate. He had bumped right into her that day even. Piper and her wolf Harper were more than nervous tracking his perfect woodsy scent through the pack house. It had a hint of blackberry, had led them all the way to him. She had been standing right behind him, only half a foot away. He was taller than she was by a long way. He stood 6'4" and was all muscled up. He'd been wearing faded blue jeans and a dark purple t-shirt that day. His dark brown hair had been a little messy. Alpha Bradley had been talking on his phone that day, and when he had turned around, had run right into her. His deep blue eyes with those flecks of green in them had turned right on her, and then he'd frowned right down at her. She was only 5'6". He towered over her. There had been no recognition in his eyes at all. "Don't stand so close, girl," he casually stated, and then had stepped around her and just walked away from her, and her heart had broken. Harper had howled in pain inside of her mind. They'd known what he was to them, but he had no idea. It was what she and her wolf had always feared, all her life, even after gaining Harper, even since she was little, had lost her parents to a rogue attack at the age of 10, and no one here seemed to notice her after her parents' death. No one seemed to know who she was. It was like she just didn't exist. That had been her life, though she had attended school here in the pack's small K-1 to year 12 school, and had graduated with good marks. People were always bumping into her and telling her to watch her step. No one knew she was there. Invisible to the entire pack is what it felt like, unless someone was looking directly at her, and she knew why. She had no scent. Though she could smell every one of them, no one could smell her. She had gotten a job and worked long, quiet hours, tucked away in the back room of a dress-making store inside the pack. She'd loved to learn how to design and create beautiful dresses. Even a lot of the pack's she-wolves wore her dresses to the pack's events and mating balls, to their 16th and 18th birthday celebrations. She, however, did not. She lived alone away from the pack, out in a tiny cabin away from everyone, so that they would not hear her sobs and distress as she put up with the pains of betrayal. The first time she had felt him with another, she and Harper had howled in pain and run away deep into the woods, found that tiny cabin no longer in use, and curled up into a ball had stayed there in agony till he'd stopped being with another. Then had just stayed there for a whole day, unable to go back to the pack. Their pain would have been for all to see if anyone saw her. That was. There was nothing they could do about it. It had hurt like nothing she'd ever felt before, and continued to do so right to this day. And to hide their pains, they had hidden themselves away, unable to tell him what he was to them. She knew he would never believe her. Only if he scented her out would he recognize her as his mate. She and Harper both knew this, and they both knew he was never going to be able to do that either. The pains were worse when he was away from the pack, mating some other she-wolf in another pack. Did not hurt her any less than the one she-wolf here in the pack he bedded on a regular basis. 3 long years she'd had to suffer now. 3 long years she'd walked the halls of the pack house, came across him, and not once did he pay her the slightest bit of attention, and when he did bump into her, as did so many others, because they couldn't smell that she was right there, he would just frown down at her, either apologize or ask her to move out of the way, and just move on. Had occasionally snapped at her, all angry to watch where the hell she was going. For 2 years she slipped into his bedroom when he wasn't here in the pack, looked at his things, touched his clothes, felt hot tears slide down her cheeks for the man that was her mate. The man that had never once scented her out. The man that she and Harper loved, but would never love them. Had even slept curled up in his bed, not that he'd ever known it. No scent of her remained. She could wander at will anywhere she liked, left no trail at all. Had even sat in his Alpha's chair once, touched his desk, and wondered what it would be like to be his Luna. Tonight, he had been with another. She knew who. He had one regular girl here inside the pack, Bianca. She was older like he was, a warrior, highly ranked. She'd seen them together chatting and flirting on occasion. Seen the way he looked at her body, even that hurt too. He desired Bianca. She was tall and very fit. All muscle. He liked that about her. Piper had once been fit like that, not tall but very fit, and had been strong too. But the past 3 years had drained her. She was thin now, always had dark circles under her eyes, and looked quite frail. The small amount of joy she had taken from training as a warrior to try and make her parents proud. They had been warriors. That joy of being a good fighter, not that she had been old enough to go out and fight, had dwindled to nothing once she'd turned 18. She was barely a shell of her former self now. She stayed away from all pack events, just worked in the small back room of the store, surrounded by materials and designs to be created. Orders to be filled. Her only solace, that she could create something so beautiful amidst her own misery. Harper was a ball of sadness and pain. They could not take any more. They had to leave. It was K*************************************** G them, and she knew it. Broadley was going away on some alpha meeting or some pack business in just 2 days, and so that is when she was going to say goodbye and leave. She had no idea if she could reject her mate without him being there or knowing what she was to him for that matter. But that was what she was going to do, had to try it anyway. It was all they could do. Piper figured if he had no idea who she was for the past 3 years, then why would he need to be there to hear her rejection? It was likely only going to cause her pain anyway. He would feel nothing because he knew nothing. Then once the full moon came and went after that rejection, surely it would be official and severed completely by the moon goddess herself, or at least she was hoping that's how it worked. She and Harper had put themselves in front of him many times. They had no choice left to them. They were nothing to him, never would be, and they knew it. 3 full years, and nothing, not once had he so much as twitched a nose at her presence. So, no more would she put herself or her wolf through that. They had enough money saved up to go out into the human world and make a living for themselves. She had good skills in fashion and design. Though she mostly made dresses, there were millions of humans in need of wedding dresses. The equivalent to a Luna ceremony gown. Spent the next 2 days in the pack house library, looking at places she could go, her mind made up. She was not even going to look at him one last time. There was no point. Sat at a computer, one hand on the mouse, scrolling through places that were well away from the pack, away from forests, and where packs could well be. She may be a wolf, but didn't feel like one, was just invisible mostly. Her other hand was on the blue azure crystal pendulum drop necklace that hung around her neck. It had a white gold chain that was fine and felt warm against her skin all the time, and had white gold casing to hold the crystal itself, and a smaller blue azure crystal ball right above the casing that attached to the chain. It had been her mother's. She told her that one day she would get her daughter one too, a gift for her 16th birthday, and they would have matching mother-daughter jewelry. But Piper had only been 10 when she had lost both her parents. She'd never taken it off. It was the only thing she had left of her, had found it on her body when the attack had been over, and had retrieved it as her only heirloom. She and Harper were at the point where they might as well live as human. No wolf would ever smell her, and she would remain mateless from the moment she rejected him. They were already resigned to that fact. Found a nice city several states away. Harper didn't care that there was no forest nearby. She had not shifted to her wolf in over a year now, couldn't it seemed, or perhaps just no longer wanted to. So she was fine with the city, didn't want to be in the woods, didn't want to run and be free, didn't seem to care at all anymore about being a wolf herself. Found and booked a flight out there, a hotel for somewhere to stay while they found a small apartment and sorted out their business that they were going to create. They would die and wither away, no more. They would become strong from this, live a human life from now on. Then they went back to their cabin in the woods by the southern border of the pack, and had just stayed there. They could see the pack's gates with the use of a set of binoculars from the roof of her cabin. Sat and watched and waited for his car to leave. Not that hard to spot, it was white. Unlike most of the other pack cars that were black or silver, he drove a white Mercedes SUV. saw it leave and grabbed her hiking backpack. It was full of her belongings. Living a simple life meant not much to pack. Her whole life fitted in that one backpack. It was large and designed to be used for long hiking trips, but even with her small, weakened stature, she could manage it. Walked through the woods until the pack house came into view, sighed heavily, and headed for it. Today was the day. She was leaving. No one would even notice she was gone because they didn't even know she existed. Only those who came into the store to buy one of her dresses maybe wonder where she had gone. At Renee's store, Haven Gowns. Though Renee had always claimed them as her dresses, told Piper she was the store owner, so this was how it was. Piper's name was on the labels of all her dresses though. Renee never minded about that, and she did pay Piper well. Not that anyone ever asked who Piper was or asked to meet her. Walked into the pack house and right up the main set of stairs, to the very top floor. No one stopped her. Placed her backpack down the hall and around near the Omega stairs that she would use to leave. It was out of sight, and no Omegas would be up here at this time of the night. All their work done for the day. Only the Alpha unit lived in this part of the pack house, and they were all off with the Alpha. Walked down to his suite and let herself in. It was clean and smelled like him. Fresh pine with eucalyptus and that hint of blackberries. Walked about one last time. A glutton for punishment, she knew. Should have just left already, but couldn't not without one last scent of him. Walked into his walk-in and touched all his clothes. Slid her hand along them all. Touched everything. Couldn't help herself. As much as it pained her and Harper, they were still drawn to him. Likely always would be. Leaving was simply self-preservation, and if her rejection did not hold, they'd likely not survive much longer anyway. Walked over and stood looking down at his bed. One last night here in his bed, and then gone at the brink of dawn. That was the plan. He'd be gone for several days, always was. The first night away was usually peaceful, but not the nights after that. Stripped off all her clothes and got into his bed. Grabbed onto the pillow that smelled the most like him and buried her face into it. Let the tears fall one last time. Fell asleep in the middle of his big king-sized bed, wrapped in his scent, in the very sheets that would touch his skin while he slept. Allowed herself to dream it was where she belonged one last time. Woke with a start. It was still dark. Then there was the sound of the bedroom door banging closed. She bit her lip. Heard movement, and then the sound of clothing being removed. She could smell him. Bradley was back. He could not smell her. Had not realized she was in here, in his very bed. Hadn't even turned the lights on. She was very small at 5'6", and was now so thin that she likely didn't even make a small lump in his bed, which had a thick plush feather-down comforter on it. Felt him get into the bed, and prayed he'd stay on that side of the bed, that she would be able to slip out once he was asleep. The punishment for this kind of thing, being in his bed, would likely be terrible. And he would be the one to dish it out. She did not relish the thought of getting a beating or whipping or thrown in the cells afterwards by her own mate. It would likely destroy them completely. Why was he back? Felt his hand touch her back, still completely on her skin, and then a large angry growl came from him. He knew there was a stranger in his bed. He was well within his rights to K***L her, and she and Harper both knew it. Wondered if he'd even feel the disconnection afterwards, though doubted it. Then his body was suddenly pressed up against her. Well, I guess you want some time with your alpha. His voice had suddenly turned all husky and his hand had slid over the curve of her HP, and he'd pulled her hard against him. His mouth was on her shoulder and a GR0 and escaped him as his fingers dug into her HP. I could use the company after my day, he'd growled. So you're in luck. Then his hand had slid up her body. It was leaving a burning hot trail over her skin, everywhere he was touching her. Piper had no idea what to do. No one had ever paid her the slightest bit of attention. No one had ever touched her, and now he was, something she never thought would happen. Slid that hand over her bead wrist and stroked his fingers over her plea. She gasped as it hardened under his touch. Heat bloomed between her teeth, GHS, and then she was tugged over onto her back and his mouth was on her neck. His hand sliding down her body. FVCK, you're hot to touch. He'd growled into her neck, sounded full of desire to her. His fingers had dipped right between her GHS and oh goddess, the pleasure of his touch. She had cried out as he'd stroked her firmly, grabbed onto him, wanted more, needed more of him. Please, she had whispered, and his fingers were buried inside of her a second later. A deep GR0 and had come from him as she'd M0 aimed at the intense sensation of him touching her so intimately, and he was moving his hand, pushing his fingers in and out of her as she clung to him, could feel her first ever M coming, gasped, and M0 aimed under his touch, arched up to him, and M0 aimed his name as it rolled through her body. Heard him growl, "Oh, that was damned fine." Then his mouth was on hers and she felt him tugging her legs apart. It was too late for her. She could not deny what she'd always wanted, couldn't even utter the word no. Somewhere inside her brain she knew she should but couldn't. Then he was in her. One hard thrust all the way in. She cried out in pain as he took her, felt his whole body still atop of hers. He knew. It was likely obvious she'd never been with another. Oh damn. Even better. He'd suddenly growled down at her. Then his mouth was on hers once more, and he started to move, taking her slowly at first, and it hurt, was uncomfortable. He was so big, and she felt stretched completely around him. His mouth moved to her neck as he tasted her skin, slid his tongue right over her mark spot, and her whole body burned hot like it was on fire. She cried out his name and thrust her PS up to meet his, pleasure finally taking over. He was her mate and was having her, if only just once. She would have him for herself. Take all of him, give him everything of herself. Felt him pick up the pace as he felt her acceptance of him inside her. Cried out as pleasure started to build quicker, ripping through her body, like nothing she'd ever imagined it could. Clung onto him and begged him to not stop. Heard his deep throaty chuckle, "I think you like it." Yes. She had answered him honestly, "Please, I want you. All of you." She M0 aimed and had meant every word. His mouth had found hers, his body moved harder and faster, giving her what she had asked for. Heard him GR0 and as he came, felt his seeds spill inside of her like a hot river spreading through her insides. Dug her nails into him as she'd cried out his name. His hands slid down her body. "You feel amazing." He growled deeply. His hands had gripped her SS firmly, and then he was moving again, hard and fast. "I want more." He'd growled into her neck, pulling and pushing at her PS. His need to have her increasing. Then he was gone from her. Piper had gasped at the sudden loss of him, only to be yanked over and up onto all fours, heard his gasp as he took her from behind. K yes, and was thrusting in and out of her firm and hard, faster and with need. Piper cried out repeatedly as he held her PS, gripping onto her hard, and was suddenly slamming in and out of her, could hear her own cries of pleasure filling the darkness of the room, could hear Harper howling with pleasure inside her own mind. As he took them, screamed out as she climaxed. Only to have him shove her down on the bed and grate out, more, was holding her down, one hand on the back of her neck while the other pulled her PS up. FVCK, he roared as he started again. Thrusting like he had lost all control, taking what he wanted furiously, hard and rough, holding her down, dominating her completely. K yes, he was really moving now, giving her all he had, everything. Could barely gasp for air herself, just cry out as wave after wave of pleasure hit her, could feel the asms one after the other ripping through her till she was screaming in pure bliss. Felt her whole body shunt forward as she screamed his name one last time as he slammed home, his seeds spilling inside of her again. His body was heavy on top of hers. She lay under him, gasping, trying to breathe and calm down. His breath she could feel was heavy and ragged like her own. "I like GU. He'd GR0 aimed as he'd rolled off of her body and lay on the bed next to her. Piper's joy at what had just happened was gone in an instant, felt hot tears burn her eyes. He liked G her. She thought as pain replaced the pleasure she had been feeling. She was his mate, and still, he did not recognize her. felt not just her own heart shatter, but Harper's too. She did not look at him, couldn't, just lay there quietly, held in the sobs of pain, and waited for him to fall asleep. Dragged her aching body from his bed, still he could not tell what she was to him, was just a good F***K, picked up her clothes, could hear him snoring softly as her tears continued to fall silently down her face. At least they'd gotten to have him, just once. Stepped away from the bed, from him, closed her eyes and tried to stop the flow of tears. Pulled on her clothes, turned from the bedroom doorway, looked at his sleeping body, pain seared through her and her wolf. They would never survive his betrayal again, not after this. They both knew it, and they knew he would go off and be with someone else again. They were nothing to him, never had been, and without a scent for him to smell, they never would be. Took a long silent breath in. I, Piper Whitlock, warrior to the Black Haven Pack, reject you Bradley Drake as my mate, she whispered into the darkness of the room and then fled as fast as she could as pain coursed through her body. Heard Harper howl in pain inside her mind. They ran from his suite, down the hall, grabbed their bag and stumbled and nearly fell most of the way down the stairs to the door at the bottom, struggling with the pain of their rejection. Refused to stop regardless of the pain. They had been through a lot of pain in the past 3 years. They knew how to run and hold it in, to hide it till they were alone. Didn't stop running until they reached the western border of the pack. She knew she looked a terrible mess, tears streaming down her face, and she'd stumbled and fallen many times as pain tore at her insides, but had picked herself up and kept going. Was still sobbing from the pain she was still in, looked at the patrol man. He was frowning right at her, had no idea where she had come from, or who she was, not scented her coming, would have heard her. But even now she could tell he was confused as to what she was. Stepped out over the border right into rogue territory, saw him step towards her, his eyes widened at her actions. Not many females would do what she was doing. I reject Alpha Bradley Drake and his pack, the Black Haven Pack as my pack. I am a rogue now, she'd stated firmly, her decision clear in her mind. Heard the border patrol man gasp in shock. Then she turned and ran from everything and everyone she'd ever known as she felt herself sever from the pack entirely. It was the only thing that could save her and Harper. They would die here if they had to stay and suffer any longer. They were not afraid to be out in rogue territory, had been out here before. Not even a rogue picked up her Wolfen scent. She was a mere human to them as well. So, a human they would be from now on. They would live, breathe, eat, and work as a human would, in the human world. Made their way to the airport to catch their flight and start over. A wolf no more.